This week's question about the greatest moral challenge is about a very sober issue, which is the question about how long do you extend life? Now, this is a question that in the last 30, 40, 50 years has become much more complicated. If it's 100 years ago, you try to extend life with whatever version of medical care you had, but the expectation was not that you would be able to extend life by the way you can now, by the use of machines, certain forms of medicines, or having experimental protocols, the various options that make it possible to keep a person going. And the reason I think it's a moral challenge is for a couple of reasons. One, we want to have around us those we love. We want to keep them with us. And especially if they're conscious, we want to keep them with us. Another reason, though, that it's a challenge is there's no question of our expectation about what kind of life we should be able to have. And I think one of the challenges, at least in the modern West, and perhaps in the broader world itself, because of the influence of the modern West and the influence of modern medicine, is the fact that we ought to have enough medical technologies that can really make it possible for us to overcome almost any medical challenge. Certainly, when I was growing up in the 1970s, there's all these discoveries that are happening in terms of science. We had put a man on the moon. We were on our way to making everything happen. Why not have that be the same case in medicine, where medicine makes it possible for us to just extend life, and not just extending it, but actually have life longer and have it at a higher quality. So that's the world that we're in, a world where we have the expectations about what we can do. And I think the thing we have to ask ourselves is, what actually are we expecting? What actually are we anticipating from the capabilities that we have with medicine? Here's another way to put it. I'll mention the conversation I had recently. I was talking with someone who is in med school, and he's on the verge of going into residency, and he made a very interesting observation. He said that if you look in most intensive care units, the people you do not see getting care in intensive care units are medical professionals. Most medical care professionals do not want to be in intensive care units. They do not want to have the measures that are being taken in intensive care. And part of his reasoning was, he said, it's because what's really happening with the extending and the extending and the extending, very often what happens is you're not getting the miracle situation. You're not getting someone for another 6 months or a year or several more years. There are a lot of intensive care situations when a person is in near death, where you try something, you try some medicine, maybe the person lasts longer. It's not clear whether it's really actually accomplishing what the family hopes is going to accomplish. It's not clear that the person isn't having negative reactions to it. The point being that what many physicians are thinking about is, well, yes, it's difficult, but the choice that maybe more people need to make at times is not to be thinking about how do I find the most extraordinary measures, but how do we learn to come to the place of acceptance and getting to the place of saying goodbye to those that we love. This is a hard thing. Here's one thing I think that can help us to think about that, though, from a Christian point of view. If we think about it from a Christian point of view, where we worship a Savior who was crucified on the cross, the story did not end with his death, because he conquered death. In other words, Christians do not believe that death is the end. Death is a transition. It is a separation. It is loss. We grieve, but it is not the end. And I think one of the things that we have to do in the face of this moral challenge is really ask ourselves, how are we really thinking about the fullness of the good news that we have, and how that good news includes overcoming death, but also not trying to find ways with all of our technologies, just because we can, to have people linger when really it may not be a quality of life, a better quality of life at all. A hard thing, a difficult thing, a very personal thing for all families. But one where I do think we have to ask, how are we thinking about death? How are we